I remember the date and time the scariest night of my life happened to me. It was between the hours of 9 and 10 at night on Thursday, July 6th, 2020, so this was during the COVID-19 pandemic. This happened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. At around 9 p.m., I started doing my laundry, starting with the washing machine, which takes around 20 to 30 minutes to wash clothing. With that amount of time to spend, I decided to go outside for a walk around my neighborhood for a nightly breeze while listening to music on my phone wearing earbuds. I was on my way back to the house around 15 minutes before 10. I was walking through a small highway that had no lampposts. It was pretty creepy going through a dark highway with nothing but trees on both sides and hearing the sounds of crickets chirping. I sprinted towards the area with some lampposts that had some lights on. Then I slowed down to walk back to the house. With about a half of a mile to go, I was on the right side of the road when a white car coming the opposite way slowed down. Then, the driver's window lowered and the man yelled at me something involving my wallet. I didn't understand what he had said to me, but then he spoke again, telling me he wanted me to drop my wallet. Not only that, but I also saw he was holding something to me. I couldn't see what it was at first. I have bad eyesight, so I wear contacts, but I wasn't wearing them during my nightly walk. I didn't even think before then to wear my eyeglasses either. Then, it hit me in my mind. The way he was yelling at me to drop my wallet and what he was holding in his hand, I highly believe he pointed a gun at me. I sprinted away back to the house, scared in the back of my mind that he was going to shoot at me or take a sharp U-turn to chase me. I was wearing a white sleeveless shirt, long jeans, and waterproof boots, but I ran without tripping. When I was sprinting, I also looked back every few seconds hoping I wouldn't see the same white car, and I didn't. I made it back to the house, sweating and reflecting on what had just happened to me for the first time, being someone who was never in a situation like that before. Never in my life would I ever think I would be a victim of an attempted robbery. What makes this even scarier is I didn't have my wallet with me. I wish I got the model of the car, the name of the brand, and most importantly, the license plate to report him. But I was too scared to know about that in my fight or flight response, and it would actually be pointless now since I made it back alive and I wasn't followed. This has taught me a lesson, that is, to try and avoid going outside at night, and if you do, to be careful or be with somebody you trust. If you're looking for time to kill during an indoor chore that takes waiting, do something that doesn't involve going outside. Either way, be aware of what happens in situations like this and be safe. Learn from this if you do go out at night. Never go alone. However, I wonder what would have happened if I didn't figure out what was going on longer, or if I told him that I didn't have my wallet. I believe that if I didn't know what was going on any longer, chances are I wouldn't be here. This happened at the last apartment that I lived at. The complex was just one building that had about 10 units in it. It wasn't too big and was affordable. I lived by myself in a one-bedroom place, but one of my favorite things about the apartment was the surrounding area. It was near a lot of stores and things like that, but directly behind the apartment was a walking trail. The trail was sort of long and went through the woods connecting to a nearby park that was popular for people to go to during the summer. When I was bored sometimes or wanted to get some exercise, I would walk on the trail. That's what I was doing one night. It was the early springtime, so the sun set pretty early still. My best friend was coming over to hang out when he got off of work, but until then, I had some free time. I had been busy all day and wanted to get out for some fresh air, so I went to walk on the trail like I had many times before. The path started out going along the back part of the apartment property and then went into long portions of woods. I walked for probably 20 minutes and assumed that I would be the only person out there in the dark, but I soon heard the sound of footsteps moving behind me. They sounded like they were maybe 40 feet back at least, just close enough that I could hear them. After a few steps, I realized it was kind of weird for somebody else to be walking at night, but then again, that's exactly what I was doing. I kept walking, but when the footsteps behind me sounded like they were getting closer, I decided to look back and see who was there. When I looked, I heard some rustling of leaves and then saw nobody was there. It appeared whoever had been walking behind me had gone into the woods to hide. Now, this was very suspicious, and I suddenly felt as though I may be in danger. I decided it would be best to find an opportunity to head back to my place. I couldn't just stop and go back, or I would run into the person, but there was a spot coming up where the path split, and one of the paths connected back. As I walked, I soon heard whoever was there get on the path again. I started walking a bit faster. Finally, I saw the path turn into two paths and I went left. I walked on this for a minute or so until there was an option to connect back to the other side, so I walked on that and was now headed back to my apartment. Whoever was behind me seemed to be getting closer. I turned around again. Once more, whoever was there jumped into the woods. This time, I barely saw part of them as they disappeared. It appeared to be a man, and all I could tell was that he was wearing a dark gray sweatshirt and brown pants. When he was in the woods, I started suddenly running as fast as I could back to my apartment. I didn't look back the entire time at all. At last, I made it back and quickly used my key fob to get inside my apartment building. Then, I was able to feel safe again in my place. I texted my friend, and he said he would head over to my place because he had just gotten done with work. This meant he would be there in roughly 10 minutes. I began making some food because I was pretty hungry, and I lost track of time a little bit. When I looked at the clock, I realized that it had been over 10 minutes, and I figured that my friend was there. I left my apartment and walked down the hallways and then down the stairs to the side door. The side door was the main door that me and my friends would go to instead of the front one. It was just closer to my unit. I walked up to the door and saw someone standing there who I initially assumed was my friend. When I got close though, I realized it wasn't. It was a man in a gray sweatshirt and brown pants, and I knew that he didn't live here. Then I remembered the man from the woods. This guy was wearing the same thing, and I knew it was probably him. I had never seen him before until tonight. He was right up against the door, looking inside right at me. I was maybe 5 feet away from him. He then tried opening the door, but it was locked. I ran back upstairs to my room and went for my phone. I called my friend, and when he picked up, he said he was just driving into the parking lot now. I told him about the guy, and he told me that he saw him. He wanted to go and ask the guy what he was doing, but I convinced my friend to wait until the guy left before coming in, and just to be safe, my friend went in the front door. I only went walking out on that path a few more times the rest of the time I lived there, and when I did, I certainly never went at night. This happened last year when I was on a road trip. I travel quite a bit and was going on a 1.5 week long trip to see some friends that live out west. It would take me 3 days to drive there and 3 days to drive back. As I was driving there, I liked to stop at cool parks along the way for hiking. It was a good way to stretch my legs after driving all day and get some fresh air. There were also some really cool spots along the way. I did that a couple of times on the way down. There's so many cool parks, especially when you get out west. I remember that after visiting with my friends for a few days, I was driving back home. On the third and final day of my road trip driving home, I stopped at a park that had a hiking trail. I got there by taking an exit and driving a little ways down a road. This park seemed pretty quiet, but it did have a parking lot. After I parked my car, I started walking down the path. It was a really good trail. It went uphill and then through a little bit of woods, and then down another hill. I was taking my time because I had left my hotel early that morning and was well on pace to get home at a decent time. This was one of my favorite walking paths that I had been on in the entire trip as well. About 30 minutes in though, I heard a noise. It was coming from way off the path, and I had to look around some trees and tall grass to figure out where the noise was coming from. It sounded like a man was yelling. I stopped and listened closely. The yelling was getting louder and louder. Then I realized whoever it was getting closer. It was a man, and he was yelling at me. Finally, I saw him emerge. He had white hair and a white beard and sunglasses on. He said that I was on his property and I needed to get out of there. I was really surprised. I had been 100% sure that I was walking on public land on a hiking trail. This man seemed really angry, and I told him that I didn't know this was his land and I thought it was public. The guy said that I was just BSing him, and then he started running at me. I told him sorry and basically started running back the way I came with the guy chasing after me and yelling. I ran all the way back to the parking lot where my car was. The man was not nearly as fast as me, so I got away from him really quick, and when I got back, I looked around the parking lot. I was the only car in it, but it had several signs as if it were a public area. I thought for some reason the park trail must go into people's yards, although the entire time I was on the path, I never saw one sign saying private property or anything like that. As I was sitting in my car and about to leave, I saw a truck enter the parking lot. It drove wildly and then went right next to my car. When it parked, I saw the driver's window was rolled down and the same guy was already yelling at me through it. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but I knew that it would be best to leave, and I backed out and drove away. I drove back down to the street, and the guy in the truck started following me the whole way. I really didn't know what I had done to make him so angry. I can understand if it were his property for him to be angry over somebody being on it, but he should know that it was an honest mistake and just be happy that I left. I hadn't argued with him or anything like that. There certainly was no need to follow me back out to the freeway. I assumed that once I exited and got back onto the freeway, he would stop following me, but I was wrong. When I merged on, his red truck remained right behind me. I kept driving the way home, which would take me about 4 more hours until I was back. It was about 10 a.m. at this time. An hour went by, and the guy was still behind me. When I changed lanes, he did. When I slowed down or sped up, he did as well. I was in disbelief, and I thought about what I could do. My gas tank was starting to get low, and I knew I would need to stop. I really didn't want to have to confront this guy again. Then I had the idea to call the police. I didn't know what they would say, but I figured it was worth a try. I dialed 911 on my cell phone and told them the whole situation. I let them know the road I was on and the area, and I was told they would have someone investigate. About 10 minutes later, I saw police cars sitting on the side of the road. When me and the red truck behind me passed it, the police car pulled out and flashed its lights. The red truck pulled over, and the police car did as well. I kept on driving. I had a follow-up phone call with the police a short time later. They told me that the guy in the truck had now turned around and was no longer going to follow me, and I was free to keep driving home. This made me feel better, and I arrived home a few hours later. When I got home, I researched the exact area that I had been and looked it up. I even ended up calling somebody from that city the next day to find out if I was on public land. What I learned was that I was in fact on a public trail and there was no private property in that vicinity. This means that I was never on the guy's property. It kind of creeped me out when I realized that. I don't know who that guy was or why he was claiming that I was on his property. I also don't know what he planned to do by following me for such a long time. Luckily for me though, I never have to find out.